So, want to start with
We'll
cutting the
start
cabbage?
with cutting the cabbage and salting the cabbage. Part of cutting the cabbage and salting the cabbage, part of what we're doing is we're drawing the liquid out of the vegetable, and that's really important for the fermentation process. So salting and pounding, we're not going to pound it so much today, but if you salt it and you don't pound it, you can just wait. So you can salt your cabbage and wait several hours, and it will
That's
slowly
the slow kimchi version.
leach. Yeah, it will slowly leach the liquid out.
Good. So
Let's
start
cut
with
cabbage. Well,
yep.
let's
get the bowl.
our cabbage receptacle.
Okay. Your knife.
So the technique that I use for cutting the cabbage, I'm making about a 2 by 1 inch rectangle out of the cabbage. So cutting the cabbage in half first. I can core the cabbage, although I kind of like the core. That's one of my favorite parts. So what I'll do is I'll leave the core on for now, and I'll cut 1 inch lines into my cabbage, and then I'll cut those chunks.
And again, this is something you can experiment with. Sometimes people like a much larger cut. Sometimes people like a fine cut. So this is, sort of up to you as you want to experiment. But this is a good place to start.
I like the core. So what I usually do is I trim the core a little ways.
And then section it.
And then cut this core part into like narrow strips. And so it's often really fun to get what I call the kimchi butt, because it's chewy and sweet. All right, so in my instructions I had mentioned that we use about 1 ounce of salt. I'd say that this is about 2 ounces of salt in here right now. I like to salt to taste, and I encourage everyone to do so. If you follow recipe, I've heard so many people tell me that they followed such and such a recipe for sauerkraut or kimchi, and it just came out way too salty for their taste. So
just salt it, try
and
it,
taste as you go, and trust your taste of how salty it should be. It should be salty enough so that it enhances the flavor of the cabbage, but not so salty that it's going to pucker your lips.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a specific salt preference for salt that you like to use to ferment?
Sea salt.
Mm-hmm.
I avoid iodized salts.
Yeah.
It just, the iodine actually inhibits
fermentation.
the fermentation process.
And we've experimented with other salts we've used. Like we did a batch with Himalayan pink, like big chunky coarse salt, kosher salts. So some of those big coarse salts won't break down all the way in your ferment, but they're pretty tasty. French gray is good, so you can experiment with that.
A little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So at this stage, you're just kind of hand mixing and making sure the salt's kind of covering all the leaves. So once it's salted and we like where it is, we'll just leave it to juice out underneath and move on to the paste.
Yep. So to make the paste, we're going to, we have 2 onions. We have, this is a handful of garlic cloves, which is about 1 whole clove of garlic. And my recipe says 1 ounce of ginger, which is about...
Do we have a little scale?
No, it's
Okay.
about this much
Okay.
ginger. Yeah. Maybe a little bit more. There we go.
Can we
And
just dice these? Or
yeah, rough chop
Yep.
on the onion, and I like to do a little bit more of a fine chop on the ginger just to give the food processor a head start.
So again, your recipe, Mara, is two onions. Is it like what are you talking about? Large, small, medium? Like these guys look pretty hefty.
These
to me.
are big
These are
old
monster onions.
Yeah.
Okay, but depends on what you're finding. You could do a couple if they were smaller. Just kind of feel it out.
And this recipe will probably yield a little bit more paste than we need for 2 large heads of Napa cabbage. You can always keep it in the refrigerator. It'll keep forever.
Okay. Well,
And that's a pretty fine chop, Willow. You can,
chunkier.
yeah, you can just chunk it up.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be so fine.
Okay. We need our magic goggles that nobody wears. Can these just go in like this? We're gonna
No,
chop
I'm
them up.
going to chop them
Okay.
just to give the,
Oh, that's right. The processor a head start.
yeah.
Onions.
I always laugh when you cry.
onions. My goodness, somebody's gotta do it. Okay, garlic in.
Garlic in.
Again. Chili.
Let's give it
Wait.
a little grindy
Spin.
first.
Walk down.
This does actually make you cry quite a bit, cutting onions up to
See?
this
It's
extent.
not just me.
It's not just you. I don't cry when I cut onions because my soul is dark and black. I can't cry anymore.
Can you advise everyone how to attain that? You're totally crying. See?
So the onions provide the juice behind the paste.
So you want sort of a mushy, pasty consistency. You want to take a little out and show
Yeah.
so you can see what you're looking for.
Kind of the onions get nice and juicy. And then we're going to put this paste in there to...
So the gochugaru has such a beautiful, brilliant red color. You can use other chilies, and we've experimented with lots of them, but we particularly love this one.
Looks pretty good.
Okay, done.
Let's see. So it has a nice paste consistency.
Beautiful red color.
Yep, just don't breathe it in too much.
Don't inhale it. Just a quick note: if you don't have a food processor or a Cuisinart, you can use a blender to achieve about the same results. Might have to
Might
push
have
it down
to
a
cut
little bit more
things
and
a
cut
little
things a bit
smaller.
finer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the amount of paste that you will ultimately use in your recipe is really up to you. The more paste, obviously, the more spice you've got.
Okay. So bring our cabbage back up and have a look at it.
And let's bring our paste out and have a look at it too. You see a nice thick, not wet, a nice thick paste that will cling on to the sides of the vegetables.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous color.
And when we look at the Napa cabbage, after we've let it sit, what we're looking for is that it's starting to get a little bit softer and a little bit of juice is starting to come out from the leaves.
Now, I think we might have to beat it up a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways, the kimchi, because you're adding the paste, kind of gets a little bit more liquidy,
Juicy, yeah.
juicy than with other traditional sauerkrauts that we often really bang. But what I'm doing right now is just massaging it a little with my hands, just kind of squeezing it. You can also use one of the sort of banging tools and just sort of lightly tap on it and see if that starts to juice the cabbage out a little bit. It's looking pretty good. Often, when you're making a traditional sauerkraut, you want to be able to, really see the liquid. Like if you push it into a jar, you'll see the liquid rising up above. Again, I don't think that's quite as important with the kimchi because you have the paste that's kind of bringing some
The
more.
other thing you're doing when you're hammering the kimchi is these big pieces, you're sort of breaking the cellular wall on the outside of the cabbage,
Go.
and that will also help to release the liquid. Now, this is our quick and easy methodology. If you were a Korean grandma, you probably would not beat up your cabbage.
Let it
you
sit.
would let it sit overnight and let the salt leach it out. But we're hasty Westerners. Looking pretty good.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, nice, getting that nice
Juicy.
It's almost like a sponge. When you squeeze the vegetable,
The
you can
liquid comes
feel
out.
the liquid coming out.
Yeah.
All right, and then let's taste it up.
Paste. Do you want gloves?
Gloves are a great tool to use at this point.
So how are you deciding, for you, I know you said everyone can decide their own paste to veg ratio, but what are you looking for? Like kind of,
I'm looking for color. I want a vibrant color. I'm also not just going to look, I'm going to taste. Taste as you go is the #1 rule for any kind of cooking. Don't just trust somebody else to tell you the way something should be.
make sure it has the flavor that you want.
Make sure it has the flavor that you want.
It looks beautiful.
It's a gochugaru for you. It's such a bright color. Gochugaru is a sun-dried chili pepper, hence the bright red color.
So good. Spicy,
Excellent.
not too spicy. Perfect.
It's perfect. I'm still crying from the onion.
It's so good we're crying.
And then
You want to jar it up?
fermentation container, that's actually the perfect size.
Okay.
I love to tell people when I'm teaching a fermentation class that doing this at home is so accessible. You can start this process with a simple ball jar. And then from there, you can get fancy and get crocks. You can get fermentation containers. I have lovely 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 5 gallon size fermentation containers that I've been collecting over the years.
And there's lots of nice little contraptions too that you can add even to the top of a ball jar that have a little sort of like off gas mechanism, so that they kind of work like a crock or a larger fermentation vessel, but you can just do it with ball jars.
The basic truth is you don't need any of that fancy stuff. You just can start this process with a simple ball jar. And notice as I'm placing my kimchi into the fermentation container, I am pressing down very vigorously to push out the air bubbles and to also encourage the liquid, my fermentation liquid, to rise up to the top. So this is how we create our anaerobic space. The anaerobic space happens because my vegetables are below liquid. When I push down, the liquid rises up over the top. Now, if I'm using a bowl jar, I'm not going to fill my jar all the way to the top because I know more liquid will be released in this space, and also gas will be released. So there will be an expansion within the jar. So I leave about 1 inch to 2 inches at the top of the jar, space for expansion. Very nice. And as this begins to ferment, it will start to bubble, it will release carbon dioxide, and if you're doing the ball jar method, you will have to go every couple of days.
Or every day in the beginning and press it down.
Press it down below the liquid again, because we don't have a weight in there, and then release the carbon dioxide. Eventually, it will remain under the liquid, and eventually there will be a gap of carbon dioxide between the top of the vegetable and the top of the lid. So after a while, you don't have to babysit it quite so much.
But in those first couple days, it's good to just check on it every day and press it down if it's risen up above. And then also you can just taste it as you go and see, how you're liking the flavor.
Right, and when you have that sour flavor, sour like a lemon that you're going for, then you know it's done. And you can actually eat your kimchi just like this. A lot of people enjoy an unfermented kimchi.
Fresh kimchi.
Fresh kimchi is delicious.